Hi everyone, it's James Cawley here, Policy Officer with Independent Living Movement Ireland, and I'm delighted to come along this evening to give a short input on housing policy in relation to disabled people in Ireland. I suppose housing choice for most disabled people in Ireland is severely limited due to their accommodation needs. And I suppose it's widely known in Ireland that we are very rich in policy making, but it's the implementation of that policy that we're quite poor at, or not so good at, if you like. I suppose if we look at the policy context in relation to housing before we go into any of the issues identified by disabled people in relation to housing, the National Housing Strategy was developed against a background of a number of policies, including the Disability Act 2005, the Housing Miscellaneous Act 2009, a time to move on from congregated settings, and a vision for change. And I suppose a time to move on from congregated settings is the policy that was the driver behind this housing strategy in Ireland. But also to say as well, as we all know, in 2018 we ratified the UNCRPD in Ireland, and Article 19 states that we disabled people should live in the community with a range of choice, dignity and respect, with supports um, that could allow us to live in the community, such as personal assistance services as well. I suppose the National Housing Strategy then developed in 2011 is the government strategy now been extended to the end of 2021. And I suppose this is to allow sufficient time in the current environment to prepare a new strategy. The strategy itself, outlined broad proposals and strategic objectives, including effectively addressing the housing and related support needs of disabled people. But the vision and strategic aims of that national housing strategy as well was to achieve a coordinated and integrated approach to meeting the housing needs of disabled people at local levels. So this meant that the local authorities established housing disability steering groups, and they were tasked with writing local authority plans at a local authority level. And I know from ILMI's analysis of these plans, we've seen a big variation in these plans, looking at some of them with very distinct targets and figures, with others been very vague. So I suppose with the renewal of the strategy and reviewing of that strategy, that's where us, the experts, disabled people with lived experience, can input into the review of that strategy. So that's going to be an exciting development going forward for us as disabled people in Ireland to feed into a strategy that is worthy of being implemented effectively in the coming years as well. But I suppose if we talk of some of the issues identified by disabled people in Ireland in relation to housing, I suppose we need to make sure that housing is a right for disabled people in Ireland, especially when we have the UNCRPD now as well. But also that the home needs to be a priority to source supports in order to live in that home. There's no point having a home and not being able to live in that home. So if that's personal assistant that we might need or assistive technology, so that's really really important that we have that in order to live within the home. Also, I suppose the location. There's no point having a home that is not it's accessible inside but not accessible outside in the location. So that link to community. So there needs to be, I suppose, accessible transport in order to get out of the home and into the community. I suppose reliance on private sector as well. Houses does not always work. So private rented accommodation is not always accessible for disabled people as well to live. And also as well, I suppose another big one, I could go on all night, so I won't, because I'm very conscious that it's a short input. But this idea of the catch-22 that many disabled people find themselves in when they're trying to live independent lives, and that is the situation. In order to get a home from the local authority, you need to have the support package in place, i.e. a personal assistance service. But the HSE then will not sign off on that package or support package unless you have a home to move into. So disabled people quite often find themselves caught in the middle of these two systems that don't seem to communicate quite well. So the link is missing. And I suppose, housing should be about choice, it should be about inclusion and freedom of movement. And I suppose when we talk about independent living, it's really important that the pieces of the jigsaw of independent living are fitting in the independent living jigsaw. And when I talk about that, I talk about that housing links up for us to be able to engage in employment, that we might do that by having a personal assistance service. And to get to employment, we need to have the transport, say, for example, that I talked about earlier on, that's accessible for disabled people as well. I suppose the last point I wanted to leave with you as well, that we quite often hear about homeless people, but we don't really think about disabled people who quite often can be the hidden homeless. This might be somebody who may live with someone else, or indeed in inappropriate settings, with no choice and no control over their lives. So this is something I suppose people are seeing as having a roof over their head. And so I suppose that's something that we quite often don't talk about when we talk about disabled people in the housing conversation. I know that was a really quick whistle stop tour on, housing, the housing policy and context, and issues identified by disabled people in housing. But I hope to join you on the Strategies for Change in a number of weeks and be able to delve into policy in relation to independent living in the coming weeks. So thanks for listening, and I'll talk to you soon.